be prepared for a lot of surprises and a lot of challenges and have the grit to just push through. Like if you're just like giving it a try, I think you're doomed to fail.
Hey everyone, this is Julian with Behind Company Lines. Today we're interviewing Antti Nivala, founder and CEO of mFiles. mFiles is a global leader in information management. Antti, I'm so excited to chat with you, not only because of your experience in information management, but also how long you've been running the company and what have you seen in terms of the transitions. You spent 20 plus years running the company in particular. Excited to kind of dive into the different growth stages that you in particular have had to go through as a founder and what the organizations look like. So I'm sure there's a wealth of knowledge in the experience. But before we get into what you've been a part of and what you've grown at mFiles, what was the inspiration or was the catalyst of starting the company in the first?
Well, I got to this business basically thanks to my father's business. I was actually at school still when I started developing software as a hobby and was constantly looking for just like, how could I be useful? How could I put this hobby into use? So my father ran a architectural and engineering business, and one thing they needed clearly was a better way to manage all the documents and other information in those engineering projects. So that's what I set out to develop.
Yeah. And what in particular were they using before? Was it just like, was there even a Google Drive? Was there just a local kind of folder with everything in there?
As you asked, since this was basically before Google Drive even existed. So this was around something like between 2000 and 2005. So even before the kind of the actual like cloud system. So it was just network share drives and some clunky kind of legacy document management systems, which were not fun to use. So I maybe at that point represented the newer generation and newer kind of thinking. So I wanted to have something better than that. And that's what I wanted to create.
Yeah. And I'm so interested to not only learn kind of what made you stumble upon working within data management system, but what in particular were other companies doing at that time that had a high volume of documentation, companies that had more resources? What did you kind of uncover through that process of learning? Okay, I'm sure other companies are having a large amount of data or a large amount of documents. They need organized. Some are doing it well. What were those companies doing at that time? Was everything built in-house? Were they using a third party? What was it?
Probably some in-house systems too, but there were these legacy players like Documentum or some others, which were basically more like kind of like archival systems. So it was very manual and cumbersome in the sense that the engineers created the designs or drafted the documents, and then there were filing instructions like how they should file those drawings into the document management system like Documentum or some of the open text products. And it was definitely not easy for the users, and it was also not very smart from an information management or organizing point of view, because those systems basically replicated the physical world. So took these kind of like archiving cabinets into the electronic work and didn't really bring anything new into the thinking of how to manage information.
And how much do you think that siloed getting things accomplished within an organization or completing a project or identifying? I think about, say, even big pharmaceutical companies who more recently had a better management system so that they can actually identify past research that they've done on something already similar. Like how much latency or how much of a silo was not only archiving that information, but then actually grabbing at it and pulling from it and extracting the pieces that you needed to. When did that become more of a reality to what it is today?
Yeah, it was terrible. And frankly, it's still a pretty horrible reality in many companies. So people don't necessarily realize that not that many companies are in a good situation with their document and other information management. Even today, it's very typical for knowledge workers, even today, to feel that they don't necessarily have a kind of like self-service ability to access the information they need to complete their work if it's not something they created personally. So if they don't exactly like know, like that's where I put it, they might feel like it's easier for them to recreate the information or contact a colleague to give it like the systems are not serving the knowledge workers well.
Yeah. And thinking about kind of the whole ecosystem around documentation, when does it really hit a founder or a company when things get kind of out of hand where, resources are starting to get mismanaged or misorganized or really out of place? I can even think about my company currently, and I can see our Google Drive really expanding and thankfully we're not something that inputs a lot of data, but I can see at some point needing something that is more sophisticated. When do you find that most companies need it? But when do you think they most recognize it?
Yeah, yeah. And I've been through all those stages myself because like we started as a 1-person, 10-person company and then grew to 100 and 500 employees. So I think I can reflect on that. I think it starts to become a need at around 10 people.
Mm,
But then when you are at 100 employees, I think everybody recognizes that this is no longer working based on the Google Drive or other kind of a folder hierarchy basis. So
yeah.
that's why I feel that for mFiles, the sweet spot for customers who we provide our solution to is maybe a kind of above 100 employees.
Yeah, yeah. And when you kind of go through this process of integration with these partners, with your experience also growing your own company, where is their current state and what is really needed to implement? Is it a system? Is it a person? Like how much is needed kind of to collaborate and actually get things in a way that's not only well organized, but also efficiently accessible?
Yeah. The kind of the lightweight or basic level tools like Google
Hmm.
Drive or SharePoint or others, the advantage of those basic systems is that kind of like you don't need any preparation starting to use for them, but
Hmm.
then that will hit you at some point. So when you kind of upgrade to the next level system like mFiles, then it will take some preparation of thinking of things like what are the key business concepts that you manage or you work with in your business. Like if you're maybe a tax advisor, you think of, okay, so I work with clients, I have engagements, maybe I'm dealing with a specific area of tax law. And these become what we call then metadata, so kind of the business context. And
Yeah.
it's typically maybe from a few days to a few weeks of working with the customer, kind of like modeling their business concepts and understanding how
Yeah.
information should be managed ideally in relation to those business concepts.
Yeah.
And that creates the foundation of the kind of the real beneficial information management that
Yeah.
it can be when things really work.
Yeah. And thinking about just like when do founders, obviously this helps with your product, I'm sure, but like when do founders start feeling the signals that, okay, things are starting to be mismanaged without having to dive deep and have a whole, whether it's like meeting about it or adding resources to reorganize or redistribute or doing it as a company. When do they typically start seeing that, okay, documents are really getting mismanaged? Is it when they're working with clients on certain projects? Are things missing and are things out of context? Where do you see most founders come in to where they need a product like yours? What were those signals that they were seeing that they needed to alleviate?
I think everybody kind of sees a gradual deterioration in terms of productivity when they don't manage information well. But what maybe most obviously hits them at some point is the risk of non-compliance, like realizing that we deal with important, sensitive client information, and we have no way of guaranteeing that we wouldn't be maybe leaking the information or
Uh,
somehow breaching the agreements we have with our clients. So the compliance angle is quite often then the trigger when organizations start looking at the next level approach to
yeah.
document management.
Yeah. How much of, that whole process of staying compliant, staying secure, how much of that has taken a large portion of the resources within your company? Did you expect that to be such a huge kind of investment as a founder working on document management and access to document? Did you think you'd have to have such a robust kind of secure organized department to kind of protect all the data your clients have? Or did you start building with that in mind?
Yeah, it's been a surprise to me. I don't think we created mFiles originally for that level of rigid compliance because as a founder of a small business and kind of developing it, I didn't realize myself how
Mhm.
stringent requirements customers and regulators have in terms of compliance. But working with pharmaceutical customers, defense sector customers, it has become
Yeah.
very clear to us that those companies deal with a high level of regulation and requirements from the outside, and they have no other option but to comply, and it's a huge business risk if they risk being non-compliant. So over time, we have truly developed mFiles to be a very robust system in terms of getting to those compliance requirements. So yeah, it's definitely one of the selling points and strengths of the platform today. But I didn't expect that originally.
Yeah. As a founder, thinking about where your product is today from where it was, how similar and how different is what mFiles is today versus when you first began the company and started working with your few batch of clients? What's changed in that process?
Yeah, I think the essence of what we do has remained the same, but obviously we do it in a much bigger scale now. So we started by serving perhaps more of the SMB types of customers, teams of 10 to 100 employees, and have grown then as our team has grown to 500 and more employees, and then the product capabilities have grown. Now it's much more typical that we deal with, let's say, mid-market to enterprise customers with thousands or even tens of thousands of employees. And that's a different ballgame, all kinds of different requirements. But the essence of managing documents and document-centric workflows and processes for the customers, I think the core ideas are the same.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking about, I was listening to the audiobook for The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and you listen to, I'm not sure if you've read the book before or listened to it, but it discusses all these different external pressures that the founder, Ben Horowitz, had to go through during his journey, and how the product had to either shift or they had to deliver on outcomes. Being that you've been on this journey so long, shares a story of where you had an external pressure, had some external force that kind of motivated or initiated your company to innovate. And what was the result of that kind of external pressure? Does something come to mind?
Yeah, maybe overall, I would say that we have learned to deal with and deal better with very diverse customer requirements that kind of pull the company and the product team to so many different directions. And it took perhaps more time than it should have taken to realize that we just cannot be or try to be something for everybody, because that's just not gonna give us the level of specialization and depth in doing something really, really well. So in the last 5 years or so, we have been much more, let's say, intentional about who are our ideal customers and what's the use case that we want to serve best. And that's helped take some pressure off me and the product teams in kind of like we have a filter when we have these different requirements pulling up in all those directions. We can filter and say that we understand how to prioritize.
Yeah. And did you prioritize based on who your best customers were, or which customers you felt had the most expansion potential?
Yeah, it's perhaps a combination always of like, okay, so there's market traction, but in our case, there was market traction in so many different industries and verticals. That's kind of like that made the decision hard. It's kind of a great problem to have, that your platform can solve needs in so many different cases. But then we tried to understand ourselves that where is the value the biggest, and we kind of understood that mFiles can offer the highest value for companies who really generate their revenue from working on information. So yeah, it's great to have companies who maybe build buildings or manufacture machinery, others. But to those companies, there are information management needs, but it's not the core revenue generating aspect of their business. But when we deal with knowledge workers, professional services, financial services, you're really dealing with the core of the businesses, and that's where we are taking mFiles currently.
Yeah. And then based on what's accessible in the market and other players that come out who are really good at, whether it's Google and you can, or Google Scholar, for instance, and it's really sophisticated search engine, or even universities have their own internally, or there's a plethora of different examples. But, what do you kind of model after or look towards or try to kind of innovate in comparison to when you think about, okay, how can I make this information seamless for these individuals to not only store this data, but access it, because it's challenging if you don't have the right labeling, you don't have the right kind of search engine or algorithms willing to kind of feature you content. What in particular kind of helps guide you into how you create that kind of modern or even newer future kind of user experience?
The core idea of mFiles has always been that we manage information by what it is rather than where it's stored, which means that we kind of, when we organize things, we talk about metadata and not about the folder structure. So kind of like we try to remind ourselves of that core. So it doesn't really matter which search engine or technology or database technology or storage technology we use. We always try to get the best, but we look for the best that can help us build this the next level of abstraction that the end users would never have to think about the question of where, like, is it in this system or this silo? Is it in the cloud or is it on premises? Is it in my email or is it in my document management system? We try to take away that question. And then, we do use all those technologies you mentioned and more of AI too in the now and in the future, to just stay true to that mission of making the knowledge workers' life easier.
Yeah. Describe to the audience, a little bit more context. What's been exciting about the growth you've seen in the past? Any kind of core reflections that you kind of utilize to motivate you to move you forward, but also what's exciting about today's traction and where you see the company going in the future?
Yeah, it's been a long journey for me already as a founder and for us as a business, but very excited about us having recently exceeded 100 million in annual recurring revenue, which is a great milestone for a SaaS business to reach. It's kind of like, I'd say it's kind of one inflection point for us in becoming a kind of a mature SaaS company, although we do intend to continue growing for sure. But yeah, for me personally, that's an achievement I'm proud about. And as I think back of all the difficulties we've had on the journey, it's really rewarding to be in this position today.
Yeah. What would you say, whether it's external or internal, some of the biggest risks that your company faces today?
Yeah, I think we have found our area in the markets. I'm not so worried about, let's say, competition or something like dramatically changing that. It's perhaps we are, as we are growing and as founders know, the company tends to there's the risk of the company kind of becoming slower and slower in innovation as it grows. And that's something we need to fight against to kind of keep this level of being able to be ahead of competition and be able to take the latest technologies into use. Because like when I look at our bigger competitors, those legacy companies, I don't expect them to come out with a lot of innovation, because I see how slow they become, and I don't want mFiles to become like that.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for the company?
I think mFiles as an independent company can go really far. So I think we have a lot of great future options ahead of us. But I think it's fair to say that now that we are above 100 million in ARR and continue to grow, if we also at the verge of becoming profitable or just getting there sometime in the future, there could be an IPO. Not quite yet. I think we need to become quite a lot bigger before that's sensible. But I think mFiles as an independent company could grow really big.
Yeah. Well, I love this next section. I call my founder FAQs. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions because I want to get some more perspectives from you before we get out here. So first question I'd love to ask is, what's particularly hard about your job day to day?
For me, as the founder who's done so many of the details for such a long time, I think that continues to be hard to just let the leaders do their job and not interfere.
Yeah. Thinking about kind of your concern about the larger organization becoming slower to innovate, kind of the inverse of every graph when you think about scaling new companies. But what kind of systems or philosophies or culture have you put in place to hopefully mitigate the risk of that, or even create an organization who innovates first rather than, who creates processes and procedures that kind of stifle that type of growth? What have you put in place?
Yeah, I think it starts from the guiding principles or values that we have. It's for us, it's make it happen, help others, and love customers, and especially that make it happen principle is one of those that, hey, it's like, let's not go behind a
Yeah.
process or bureaucracy or the reasons why we can't do. Let's just do it. There are things like
Simple.
kind of like setting up small teams to experiment with things. But I mean, that's part of our job now as we lead the growth, that how do we make sure that we enable innovation to still happen rapidly? There's so many things that can kill that speed.
Yeah. I think about as founders kind of go through this journey, they become kind of the 0 to 1 founders and the 10 to 2, and they continue to expand. And, that during that experience, you get further and further away from the team and thinking about how you can impact them. If there a certain, obviously you'd love to spend time with everyone, but is there a certain kind of group of people that are super crucial to the success of the business that you wish you could spend a little bit more time, whether it's developing them or spending time during their day-to-day, any group kind of stand out who are just ultimately crucial to building a successful tech company?
That's a great question. And to me, it's the sales teams and the product team. And I don't want to sound like other teams wouldn't be hugely important, but I think they're kind of like staying in touch with also the field teams in both of those, kind of like somewhere there is the wisdom of what we need to continue doing in order to be successful in the market.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the direct feedback, right? That's where it's coming from, whether it's from the clients or customers or from who's using the product, the current customers that you have. And yeah, I totally understand wanting to spend time to maybe even change more quickly or more rapidly or make adjustments. How do you do that when your organization has now all these tiers of managers, people who really, support and impact the success of your business, but, the more people to talk to, it's just harder to make change. Is there a system in place? Do you keep a close touch with your managers? How do you keep that kind of close watch to what's happening on the front lines?
Yeah, we try to have a pretty systematic way of having regular meetings at, let's say, each level of the organization, and then visiting each other's meetings. So obviously I run my own leadership team meetings, but also then visiting department level meetings. And I also try to do more than 10 one-to-one calls with, frankly, randomly with employees across the organization every month or quarter. Just like that's fun, because then you hear the truth, and it's not filtered by the managers.
Yeah. Yeah. Thinking about the funding landscape, just taking a step back and thinking overall within tech, what was pretty advantageous about when you funded at that time versus what the funding environment is today? Do you reflect on the timing of when, M-Files, whether it was raised money or scaled or moved capital, what's changed in that environment? Do you reflect at all on the timing of when you did kind of raise money and scale your company?
Yeah, we've gone through a couple of very different phases. First of all, you may not realize that we spent more than 5 years in bootstrapped mode before we raised our first funding round. So we did get to about 10 million in revenue without any external funding. And that I would attribute maybe mostly to the fact that when we started, the funding like it's available today just wasn't available for companies like us, especially in Europe at that time. We raised our Series A in 2013, Series B in 2016, and then the latest one, Series C, which was more substantial in size, about 80 million USD. That was in January 21. So those have been, in those stages, we've been definitely growth oriented and have, I'd say, have enjoyed a lot of interest from the investor community. So it's been, I don't think it was hard to raise that money, but I'm also happy that we didn't happen to raise at the very top of the peak of the hype or anything like that, because that can also be quite difficult then when things turn in the other direction, like has happened. So I think we've frankly also been somewhat lucky to raise money at times where it's been available, but it's not been available at ridiculous terms.
What was at the different stages where you did raise money? What were the different priorities? Was it scaling certain teams? Was it buying certain companies to actually add onto your product line? What in particular did you see was necessary, and where did you deploy that capital at each stage?
Yeah, for us, the biggest use probably in each of those funding rounds has been the expansion of our go-to-market. So as we are a European originating company, we've had to invest quite a lot to, first of all, get to the US market. So scaling the
Yeah.
sales and marketing teams outside of Europe, getting that foothold in the US, also growing the leadership team to be truly international and let's say half US based. Those I would say that we've used most of the funding for go-to-market scalability. Some acquisitions and some obviously acceleration of product development, but go-to-market has been the key.
Yeah. What did you say? Something launching in other company or in other countries obviously has somewhat of a playbook, right? Whether you hire a consultant who works locally in that environment, who gives you all this data that you need to deploy, or you do it yourself, you have your own team that does it. What is something that is, say, less considered during this process of scaling into another country that most founders just don't expect when going and trying to try out different markets in other areas?
Yeah, I would argue that there's no playbook like it.
No.
Like it's just such a unique experience that you kind of only realize when you do it. And I'm afraid that even if I tried to then help others to understand what kind of challenges they face, it's like really
Yeah.
difficult to believe what kind of differences and challenges you'll face. So maybe the best is just to say that kind of like be prepared for a lot of surprises and a lot of challenges and kind of like have the grit to just push through like that. Like you can't just like do it a little bit. Like you have to be really strong with your conviction of entering a market. If you're just like giving it a try, I think you're doomed to fail. But if you don't accept failure, I mean, sometimes you probably need to accept failure. It's not smart to not accept failure, but that's where founders just need to get it right. That when you will push through, even though it's like super hard.
Yeah. Yeah. What's helped you do it for so long? I mean, I obviously, I think most founders can say they just can't imagine doing anything different because it's just so ingrained in either your nature to pursue this project out. But obviously it's challenging, and it takes a lot of, like you said, grit, takes a lot of emotional energy. How have you overcome those challenges along with all the other business obstacles?
Yeah, for personally for me, there have always been kind of different set of challenges for every year, and I've actually had various roles along the journey. I was the CEO for the early years, then for about 10 years, I led the product department, had another person run the company as a CEO. Then I've returned to the CEO role. I've relocated from Europe to Texas in the US, and we are achieving these different milestones like the 100 million ARR mark recently. So kind of like it's been exciting every year, and the next year is going to be different. And again, like now, perhaps the market has changed and there's a higher willingness to see also profitability in SaaS companies. So yet another set of challenges. And I think mFiles is a company that can do really well in this market environment. So I think I'll continue as long as it keeps as exciting as it's been so far.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think is one quality about yourself that allows, whether it's curiosity, whether it's an inability to quit, what is something that you think has helped kind of push you to not only build a company from 0 to now 100 million in ARR, but for as long as you have? Is there any kind of innate ability that you're like, I think this is probably what's helped me pursue this insanely for so long?
Yeah. Interesting. I probably a certain level of like crazy just being overly determined to just get there, regardless of the obstacles. But also I think as I think back, I probably have been quite good at then also adapting to the different needs of the company, because they are very different at 10 person and 100 person and 500 plus persons. So I hope I've been pretty good at that kind of like adaptation, and that has helped.
Yeah. Antti, I know we're coming to the close of the show here, but I always love to ask this next question because I love how founders extract knowledge out of anything that they ingest. Whether it's books or people, what has had a lasting impact on you as an entrepreneur?
One of the early business books I read is Jim Collins' Good to Great. And I think that kind of continues to be somehow like both of like what kind of a leader you would want to be, but also like what are the lasting values you build into the company. I think that has had the greatest influence.
Yeah. And what is that in particular? Is there any like a message in there that you still hold, or anything that it influenced in your current company, any particular value? Yeah, anything at all that was more specific.
Yeah, I think there are two concepts there that I continue to remember very well. And first of them is I think it's called the hedgehog concept in English. I read it in another language. And that's about like the three things you need to focus on to build a lasting business, and just things like you have to continue working on something you're really passionate about.
Yeah.
Something where you can be the best in the world, but also something that actually impacts the profits and the revenue of the company. So kind of like looking for that kind of a triangle of those three things need to be true. That's one. The other one is about leadership and kind of what's an ideal kind of a leader. And there's this kind of a level 5 leader type described there, which that's my ideal of type of leadership, and that's what I'd like to be.
Love that. I love that. Antti, it's been such a pleasure not only going through kind of the journey of the company, but also the technology in the space. And obviously you mentioned some AI bits. So before we trail off out of this episode, in particular advances in the current technology that other companies are working on, do you feel particularly excited about and how it could be impactful in M-Files? And not only has it been, but also, what do you think it's going to allow M-Files to become?
Very easy to see how search will, or finding information will be revolutionized. So looking forward to applying that research, those innovations into our platform too. I'm also very interested to just see that with the whole concept of how we interact with software, kind of the UI concepts, like will we change from a graphical user interface into some sort of a text or chat type of a user interface also for these kinds of business things like document management. That's not entirely clear to me, but that's something we really need to figure out.
Yeah. And have you thought about how crypto and kind of NFTs, kind of that whole kind of blockchain tracking validation, does that ever come into mind, or is that still a concept that still needs to be fleshed out a little bit more before you integrate something like that?
We have actually looked at that quite a lot in the past years, and maybe a little bit to my surprise, it hasn't really found a very clear application in what we do. I don't know if we just don't see it or if it's just not really what's needed. There are some clear things about like traceability and like validation or authenticity or integrity, but it has had less influence on the types of platforms that we build that I would have, except cryptography, of course, like security related things. But if we think of these, let's say, ledger types of things and blockchain types of things, it's been interesting that it hasn't changed more.
It is, I always like to ask that question just because those are great for SEO traffic on the show, but also more so just because they're such interesting, innovative, recent technologies that a lot of companies think about. And it's exciting to hear that companies like yours, even at the scale you are at, are still kind of experimenting with things that are out there, listening to the news on different pieces of technology and how they're integrating. But last little bit, I know we're coming to the end of the show, and right before we give you a chance to give us your plugs and where to find and support you, is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have? Anything left on the table today?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's been a great discussion and covered quite a lot of the long journey that we've had.
Amazing, Antti. Well, it's been such a pleasure not only going through your journey, but also the company and talking about not only your business, but also the grander startup market and tech in particular. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you again for being on Behind Company Lines. Last bit is, where can we find you? Where can we be fans? What's your Twitter? What's your LinkedIn? Where can we connect with you as fans, but also maybe even as founders and investors who are interested in learning from you and listening to you?
Yeah, obviously the company page at mfiles.com is where you will find me, and I think I'm most active in LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me based on my name, Antti Nivala. There, happy to talk more.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show, Antti.
Thanks, Julian.